Welcome to People More Interesting Than Me, the podcast, where I step back and let fascinating individuals take the spotlight. Join me as I sit down with incredible guests who captivate and inspire, showcasing their stories, experiences, and wisdom that make them truly extraordinary. Tune in for engaging conversations that'll leave you enlightened and entertained. At least I'm entertained. This week, we're joined by a true political strategist extraordinaire, Matthew Krayton, the founder of Publitics. Matt has been the guiding force behind campaigns at all levels of government, offering counsel to both public and private sector clients. Notably, he's played a pivotal role in the 2020 presidential campaign, creating Biden's viral "We Just Did" hack. In an era where technology shapes political landscapes, we'll also explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and political strategy. Matt's insights into how AI advancements are influencing the political sphere promise to be both fascinating and eye-opening. Whether you're a seasoned politico or a curious observer, get ready for insights and revelations from a brilliant mind of Matt Krayton, founder of Publitics. Enjoy. Where are you out of? I saw that you have, I guess, a main office in Jersey and then a satellite site in DC.
Yeah, so I am in Jersey, so I spend most of my time here, but we also have satellite offices in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and also Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
The Amtrak Northeast corridors.
Gotcha. No, that is nice. To be fair, I love the train system, and I wish it was much better in the US compared to like Europe, just because what was it, maybe like a month ago, my wife and I went to a wedding in Philadelphia, and it's just amazing to do that over driving to Philadelphia from DC. Because you get on there, you're there in like 2 hours. It's amazing. So I won't do like the normal cheesy introduction. We can just dive into it. What two questions I like to ask just to break the ice and make it comfortable is, it's kind of guilty pleasure. One is, when you're growing up, what was the go-to meal when you guys were in a rush or?
Sure. That's a good question. So when I was growing up, we had a couple of go-tos, which I think is pretty similar for a lot of people of my generation. So we had multiple varieties of chicken with different sauces. So like Campbell's soup, right? Dumping a can of Campbell's soup over it, or like mac and cheese was always a good go-to in a pinch. But it was definitely a lot of chicken, and then also, which is interesting. So this is something I was thinking about recently, because we were talking about like generational divides among our team here, and one of the things that popped into my head were these the TV dinners, right? So I think you and I are probably in
the
same.
Banquet.
Yeah.
Well, Banquet, if you were like lower, that was like probably the cheapest one you could buy, but Banquet
And
pot pies. But keep going.
Yeah, the ones with the for the kids, the one they had like penguins on them and like other zoo animals and stuff. So
Blue box, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yep, exactly. So those were always on tap too. If we needed something. And I don't know. I go to the food store all the time. I haven't seen anything quite like that in a while. I'm sure they're still in there if I went digging, but I don't know if kids these days have the pleasure of enjoying one of those like soggy, kind of brownies coming out.
I was gonna mention the brownie, but I didn't want to stop your momentum. I was like, that brownie was just like, it wasn't bad. It just tasted unnatural.
Oh yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, there was something up with those, but you know what? It was good in a pinch, and
I'm still alive, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I can tell you, I don't still eat those. Those are not my guilty pleasure these days. So I'm really trying to watch what I eat, which is, just kind of a health kick. I think you turn, well, I don't know, at least I did. You turn like 35 years old and you start staring down the barrel of 40, and you're like, maybe I should start taking care of myself and worrying about things like blood pressure and cholesterol and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm
But
like,
I think it's like a seesaw. It's just like you get to an age where you actually have career stability and you're actually making income where you're like, I can like it's funny. It's like 401ks. I understand 401ks. I can put money into 401ks. I can afford bread that isn't whiter than snow, basically. Like all these things that you can pay a little bit more for, and it's not like Pop Tarts is or cereal is like the only thing you can have for breakfast. Like you can have maybe some healthier options.
oh yeah, that's right. Sourdough, right? Nice sourdough. That's,
Exactly. Like
that's right.
afford some seeds on the on that outside of that bread.
That's it. A
Um,
little artisanal. Yeah.
exactly. Um, so you mentioned your team. Can you dig a little into, I guess, your team and I guess how you started and your mission?
Sure. Yeah. So, how did I start? This was what I like to call a very millennial kind of story. So, I went to college, and my intention was to become a teacher, to teach high school social studies history. So, pretty straightforward. So I did history and as my major in undergrad and a minor in political science, and then I got my master's degree in education. So I went through the whole process, doing the student teaching, all of that stuff. So I graduated with my undergrad in 2010 and master's degree in 2011. But in the middle of all of that, there was this little financial crisis, unfortunately, and that had a devastating impact on the teaching profession. In New Jersey, there were these drastic budget cuts across the board. So jobs were getting eliminated left and right. And what ended up happening by the time I was out of school was for every job opening, there would be hundreds and hundreds of applicants in some cases. And many of those applicants already had a significant amount of classroom experience. So here I am, college grad, no job, or very few jobs. So I put a bunch of applications in. Didn't hear much of anything back, which is pretty typical again of people in my of that cohort. And the other piece of it too is like while that was going on, I started to reflect a little bit on my experience because I did the student teaching thing and love the active teaching, love the students. It was a great time doing that. What I didn't like was the increasing amount of paperwork required in the teaching profession, right? So all the standards and the testing and all of the stuff that I honestly don't think really helps students all that much. And as an educator, it was mind numbing, to be honest with you. So, I mean, we started to see a lot of, teachers at the end of their careers leaving because it was just kind of getting to that point where it was a little miserable for them. So I started to reflect on it and go, well, do I even want to be doing this long term? Can I see myself? Because like once you go down that path, it's very easy to do it for the rest of your life. You get tenure. It's great job security. But it's hard work. Like I mean, I have a lot of teachers who are friends who are teachers. Family who are in education, and the stuff that they tell me, it's tough. So I was thinking, what, maybe I don't want to do this either. So I just like took the first job that came along. Was applying to all sorts of different things. So I ended up getting a job at the university I graduated from in the alumni affairs department. So this was a wild thing to be doing during a financial crisis. So my particular position, they created two new positions for two young alums, one from one campus, one from the other campus. So I came in with another guy, and we shared an office the size of like a broom closet, basically.
What university was it? I didn't.
Fairleigh Dickinson University
Okay.
in New Jersey. So not many people would know it other than there was some success with the men's basketball team.
Okay.
Yeah. So made it to the tournament and made some waves, beat some pretty big name teams. So we're pretty excited. Definitely not a marquee basketball program, but
But
every
still,
now
that's good. I mean, I feel like people like those over, like Kentucky and all those ones. But
oh
be
man, I had a
fun.
lot of fun watching it. It was a cool it was a cool experience because it's not a big sports school, right? So like you talk to people who went to like Notre Dame or
Oh yeah, yeah.
Georgetown or some of these other schools that have like really, or even Seton Hall, which is right near us, where they have consistently very good sports teams, and it's a totally different environment, right? Like people are all into it. Like FDU is like, well,
Yeah, it is completely different because it feels like they're always on, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But if you're like one of those schools that comes out of nowhere, it's like, yeah, we probably spend like $300,000 on that program a year, where you guys spend like in the like millions and millions. By the time you remember that time we went all the way, you know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
like you don't always have to be on, like, you know.
Yeah, sort of like cicadas, right? They emerge every 14 years or something. So
Exactly. That would still be good for your school though, every 14 years.
not bad. Yeah, no, that would be pretty consistent. And the amount of money they spent on or still spend on athletics is pretty small compared. Very small compared to. I think the head coach. Like I had heard some rumor that he was being paid somewhere in the 45 to $50,000 range. So he left immediately after the
He
tournament was
left.
over. He left immediately.
Oh
Like
yeah, I mean like that's like one of those positions you see in clickbait like a week or two after like how far they make it. And then you're like, "Oh, coach accepts head job at like Louisville," or obviously not like I don't even like basketball, but I always find those stories fascinating.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. So I was at Fairleigh Dickinson. And actually the sports thing is kind of an interesting element to what we were doing. So we were hired specifically to cultivate young alums to donate to the school. And a big part of that job was cold calling through recent grads.
This is with the financial crisis. So they were asking you to cold call these people during that. I love that. That's
Oh,
like
it was awesome.
that's like trying to get what's that blood out of a stone.
That's right. That is right. So I had a lot of conversations, some interesting conversations. Many ended in people telling me to go do certain things to myself or jump out of certain, jump out a window, or so a lot of colorful sort of responses, which I don't blame. I mean, like student loans, right, and very few job prospects, a lot of frustration at that point. So, you learn. You definitely learn some lessons about rejection during that whole period. So we were kind of doing that, not what I would characterize as fun work, but it was something. And then 10 months after we were hired, we were both laid off, positions eliminated. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? So while I was doing that, I was like, I've always liked politics and I liked communications type work. So why don't I just try to start up like a little bit of a side hustle, see if I can't get a couple clients and whatever. So I did that and didn't get too much traction for the first year, and then I got laid off and took another job at the university doing some other civic engagement stuff for a little while. But then I ended up getting a couple of clients on the side. Um, it was just basically me and a credit card and an LLC, right? So that's how it started. And I was like, well, what is my pitch? Because typically candidates. So I was looking to work in politics specifically, do political consulting, help candidates get elected, and I was like, what are they going to trust me to do? I'm right out of school. I have no marketable experience in this space other than having in grad school worked at the Public Mind poll, which was a public polling institute at FDU, where you measure public opinion on a variety of issues and in specific campaigns, approval ratings of various elected officials and stuff like that. So I got really good experience in the polling side and research side of things during grad school, but again, not the same thing as running a business. So I was like, what would people trust me to do? I'm young. Let's do digital. Like let's do digital media. So I went and pitched myself to a couple of campaigns. I ended up getting brought on to help manage local town council race. Nothing huge, but it was good practice. And then ended up also working on a congressional race. I reached out to specifically because I knew it was going to be a loser, and because the winners don't hire people like me. And if they do hire people like you or me, the job would be getting coffee, you know what I mean? Fetching coffee and, running around
Yeah.
pounding lawn signs into the ground. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. So they ended up hiring me. We ended up winning the local campaign, which was a bit of a surprise and ended up being a really great networking opportunity.
Can I circle back to something that
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
this is just like the coach who won or took you all the way to the basketball thing. So this is where you get asked by a bigger school for a better job, correct?
Something like that. It took a while for things to gear up. So it was a lot of a lot of grinding it out, a lot of networking, a lot of meeting as many people as possible, and honing the craft too. I think that was the most important thing that I dedicated time to doing is learning everything that I could about what I was trying to do. Um, so this is gonna sound super super nerdy, but in addition to trying to uh, learn everything I could about these digital platforms. Like Facebook was like the big thing at that time. You could still get a ton of organic reach. It was like the heyday of Facebook. So that was the big one. And I also was like digging into academic papers and like social psychology and like persuasion and like all sorts of different things, like like just trying to learn like how do people think, how do they react, how do they how can you communicate to people in a way that's compelling, and that'll stick. So I kind of went down that path too of like trying to learn everything that I could, and still do that actually, which I think has been very helpful. So between that and honing the craft, and then some blind luck as well. So this is 2012, and right before election day, Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy hits New Jersey. So that was this big like monster hybrid hurricane storm thing that totally steamrolled New Jersey, put a lot of people out of their homes. Power was out everywhere. So I got a Twitter DM from a guy who I'd been going back and forth with, trying to. I was actually, he lived in the same town that I live in, and I was trying to get him his absentee ballot application because he was going to be out of town for the election. And I was like, oh, you got to vote, whatever. So he shoots me a DM and he's like, hey, do you want to come meet at the only bar in town that still had the lights on? Now, this is the like grossest, place you can imagine, like the diviest of dive bars, sticky floors, the taps hadn't been cleaned in decades or whatever. But I was like, whatever, let's go, why not? Right. So I met him. And at the time, he had just started his own consulting firm in the same space and had worked for a U.S. senator, and got to talking. Really great guy, mentor, and ultimately, he was like, "I need some help, extra capacity in my firm. You do want to do some like consulting on the side?" So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So things kind of snowballed from there. So I think the lights going out actually kind of helped during Sandy. So there's a little bit of blind luck in there as well, in starting this, and I've been rolling ever since.
It's funny you say blind luck because I think people think it's luck, but it's just consistent effort, if that makes sense. I think there's a certain point where you plateau and you feel like nothing's going right. But if you keep on going on that, the marshmallow test, you give a young kid like two marshmallows, and then you say, "Hey, I'll give you another marshmallow if you wait." And if you wait even longer, I'll give you two more. A lot of people think it's luck when they get into those situations. But if you're in the right spot, continually doing what you're trying to do, and you step and then you wait for that spot to open up, sometimes it is luck, but sometimes it's just continued effort that you finally get rewarded for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I mean, luck in part is putting yourself in the position for something to hit eventually, or some catalyst to move things along. So that the power being out was a little bit of a catalyst, but um, just being in the position to even, I mean, there was a little serendipity that he was on a list as well, voter
Yeah,
list. They
that's
were like,
true
all
too.
right, well, we got to get you to vote and all that stuff. But it just yeah. So putting yourself in the position to have a break every now and then, because if you say no to I could have said no. I mean, like, I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
you, and it's cool, but like I'd rather just like sit at home in the dark and whatever.
yeah. If you look at it that way, I mean, 9 times out of 10, you probably wouldn't have gone.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
So it's also being there and being open to it, and then the odds of something like that lining up. So I guess you doing, work like that, you probably had a lot of those resources of that company that helped bolster it too, right? To get your, I guess, your legs out for your own company.
Yes. So Steve is his name, and he helped me in a lot of different ways. So he was, even though I was trying to start my own thing and was very much still kind of independent while working with him. He was very generous in making introductions to his network, which was vast. I mean, he had been working in this space for a while at that point, and rose to prominence in those circles. So he was not shy or stingy with introducing me to people, which I'll be forever grateful for. And also just not having any idea what I was doing in many senses, right? Like I kind of like I knew how to do the work at that point for the most part. I mean, there's still always something that you can learn, but I, for the most part, knew how to do the work. So but I learned a lot of the business of how to be in business from him, right? Just watching, which was extraordinarily helpful as well. And then also getting more hands-on experience working on some of the projects that he was working on. And then also I don't know. I guess if some people in his position would have been like, nope, you can't do anything on your own. Like you're working for me now. Like this is, but he was very flexible too. If I wanted to go like do a campaign or some other thing, he was always perfectly happy to support me in doing that as well. So, I think mentors are super helpful. Like, so above all, great business partner and fantastic mentor, so that really did help in a number of ways, watching him and his style and building his business, and doing the work on his end as well.
And we talked about this a little before the interview, but do you think that point of time gave you time to evaluate kind of the market for PR, like really analyze where there was a vacuum for you to kind of fill with your company?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think we're still trying to figure it out, right? Like and that's always
I
I
mean,
think
that's always good though. Because I feel like if you really know it, it's too late, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of stale. Whereas if it's kind of an amorphous type thing, it's just kind of constantly changing, which is what the market will be, if that makes sense, in any respects.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it did give me an opportunity to evaluate the broader market, and look for gaps in there. So one of the things that I saw kind of early on that was a huge gap in the communications consulting and PR space was that a lot of firms would, and not every firm, but a lot of firms would come in and lead with tactics, and there wasn't a strategic component, well thought out strategic component to how to accomplish something or why we were even doing anything, right? So, you get firms coming and saying, "Oh, well, we'll do a bunch of press releases for you," blah blah blah. It's like, okay, great, like, but why? Why are we doing press releases? Like, who's the audience? Who are we trying to reach? Like, what? If you great, like if you get your story in the New York Times, but you're like a B2B, like super niche software company, for example, SaaS company, maybe that's not the actual place that you want to be focusing on. Like, there's some very specific, like trade magazines, for example, that might be a better pitch for the media relations side of things. So I think, seeing a lot of that, just like sort of tactical, like, oh, we'll just like do all these things and without actual like an organizing principle for why, was a huge gap in the market. Now, marketing that is harder than it looks or sounds, right? You would think that that'd be
Because yeah, it's not quantitative. You can't really show that unless you've got like a case study of someone that you've worked with before. That makes
it,
sense.
it is, and the there's less of of sort of a one-to-one measurement of strategy than there would be a tactic, right? So like I say I'm going to send a press release, I send the press release and it gets picked up by some outlet. That's a very one-to-one thing. So it's like, I did the thing, it got picked up, mission accomplished. Where strategy is much more global than that. So you can see the impact in different places in an organization, whether it's like internal communications or through increased sales and revenue, or brand equity. If you're measuring that through public opinion sort of research. But it's not always evident immediately, which is a tough thing to do too. So that was an interesting thing. Also working with him and kind of getting my feet wet is trying to figure out what people value as a service provider for them, and a consultant and a trusted advisor ultimately. So that was a bit of a shock to the system, because as a young practitioner of some of these things, you think, well, the person who does the best work should be the one who is most successful in the short term. That's not always the case, right? Now, I do believe that is in fact the case in the long term. Long term, you're going to have a much more sustainable business than if you don't invest in doing it the right way. But short term, there are a lot of things that people, like prospective clients, value over the work itself sometimes, which was a hard lesson to learn, because you kind of get angry, right? You're angry, but you're like, why? I'm doing all this great work. I have the numbers, I have the data, I can show you something else, right? There's some other thing, some other shiny object. So that was an interesting lesson.
Speaking on that, do you feel like a constant job is to, I guess, tell the campaigns or the candidates how to see something long term, where they're constantly just looking at the short term? Like, for example, obviously, I'm saying this from a point of view where I don't know much about it, but if I'm a candidate, I'm looking at the polls constantly. And then obviously the biggest thing is if I win, rather than, I guess that's the biggest picture for a candidate. But for a campaign, what do they say? Like for legislation, like you don't really see anything until 8 years down the line when something actually gets passed. How do you, I guess, get that across for stuff that's more long term than,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of layers to that. So, the first layer is, I think we're all why this is kind of goes back to that marshmallow test that we're talking about, right? So I think there is a lot of incentive to just eat the one marshmallow before you get the second one, right? Rather than waiting it out, because there are a lot of short term rewards to be had. Both and we're sort of wired like this, unfortunately. So, for example, if you're a candidate and you're talking to someone and they give you good feedback, that's important and helpful, but they're a sample of one, right? That's one person. So it's like they give you good feedback and then they tell you to do X, Y, and Z. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because that felt good, right? That was like the hit of chemicals in my brain that I needed, so I feel great after, Susie from the next town over tells me that I'm doing great and they love my campaign. So that's a little tough in being able to pull yourself back and make an objective assessment when you're constantly confronted with stimulus. The negative is true too. Someone tells you you're doing something wrong, sample size one, and yet there's this instinct to address that one thing immediately, or address that thing at all, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. So you're constantly trying to say, okay, like let's take a step back, look at the actual strategy that we laid out, and see where we are on that roadmap, essentially, that we drew out for you. And where does what this person is saying fit into that? And oftentimes the answer is no, because there are a lot of armchair whatevers, right? Armchair campaign managers, armchair, quarterbacks, if it's like watching sports, right? I'm sure everyone's got like some idea of how whatever their favorite quarterback could have played differently, or their head coach, or like you remember growing up, like hearing people yell at the TV when the football game is on. He's like, oh, he could have called this. It's like, do you know that though? Like, there's a reason you're sitting in this basement watching TV, and they're on the field, even if they're not the best head coach in like professional football or whatever. There is a reason that they are there, because they do have some degree of expertise. So anyway, I think there are a lot of armchair experts out there, which is fine. But, figuring out how to react to those things is tough on a short-term basis. The other thing too is seeing a few steps ahead. So if you get punched, does it make sense to punch back right away? Or do you want to take a step back, reevaluate, and play the game a couple moves down the board? Um, sometimes you do want to punch back, and that does make strategic sense. Other times you want to just wait, let it roll, roll off you, and do the next thing. But specifically in campaigns, it's highly emotional, right? So like if you're running comms for a brand, it's a little bit different because the brand is the brand, and yes, like people have an emotional connection, but the people working for the brand are not the brand in some
Yeah.
ways. They
There's
are.
no face, well, sometimes there's face to a brand, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's indirect.
Right. It's not a commentary on you personally, oftentimes, right? So, whereas a candidate, it's always directly about you, specifically as a human being. So that can become that's a hard thing to overcome, to sit there, take a punch, and look strategically down the line. And even beyond that, like we've had situations where again, you're looking at just the next step and saying, okay, we have this problem right in front of our face. And even with non-client, like people who we were pitching for business, and you tell them something that they don't want to hear, and then they don't hire you because there's another firm that's willing to tell them what they want to hear. But for example, if if you're having issues, like say you're a hospital executive, right? And you're having issues with the nurses, and your instinct is, well, let's bury the nurses union. Well, what do we know about nurses, right? Just got out of a pandemic. They went through hell, along with all the other people in the hospital, medical professionals in the hospital. Extraordinarily well-regarded profession, right? People love nurses. I think everyone's got a story where a nurse, brought them profound comfort or saved their life or whatever. So like nurses are kind of on a pedestal, right? So you're going to fight with the nurse, like knock them down. It's so then you go and you say something like, well, I understand that this is the immediate problem that you have, but you also have problems X, Y, and Z, and perhaps you can just let this one slide, work with the nurses on problem X, Y, and Z, and then you'll be in much better shape because you're not fighting the nurses, number one, and then you come out looking ridiculous, and they're going to win anyway, so it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, it's bottom line. Like for the most part, they're going to get a good chunk of what they're asking for. And number two, then there's going to be bad blood when you're trying to figure out the rest of the issues that if you are able to solve those problems, will benefit you and your staff and the bottom line and all of that. But people don't want to hear that. They're like, oh, let's just go out. And it's like, just take a step back and look. Like sometimes the way through a problem isn't to try to take a wrecking ball to it. You know what I mean? And so that's a huge instinct, I think. A lot of short-term thinking, not very strategic at all. So it's interesting, and it's not always. I'll tell you, it's not always profitable to tell people what they don't want to hear. But I'm a big believer, and you kind of have to. So
Yeah, just you describing that sounds like me talking to my son. Like actually, like if we know the hard conversation you have to have all the time. It's just funny because when I go to work, I try to avoid those like hard talks I have to have with my boss. In your profession, you have to have the hard talks. That's like if you're not having the hard talks, it might be fine short term, but obviously long term for elections or public relations, it'll be negative. Just like you said with time frame and um, I guess analyzing the impact of situations or I guess certain um, I guess situations that they might get into. Um, with obviously in the last like 5 or 10 years, it's hard to tell with COVID years and everything with that. Obviously, cancel culture is probably a huge thing that you have to think about, I guess, in every step you make. Obviously, it probably means a lot more business, but it also means, I would say, walking on eggshells. Would that be kind of like a close to what it's like?
that's an interesting question. I don't want to say walking on eggshells. I would rather frame it as um, having cultural competency. So there's this whole idea that um, That's, and I better watch myself as to not get canceled, because it's like you can get canceled on both ends of it, right? Like in one way or the other, right? You can,
Yeah. I mean, you can get poked. Yeah. And it all boils down to the audience. You know what I mean? Like, because you have, I mean, obviously there's a strong civil rights, but then civil rights aren't so clearly defined. That's the issue.
oh yeah, 100%. So the way that I kind of think about this is that cancel culture in many ways, in the way that we think, that most people think about it, is actually just market capitalism, right? So there's no unseen sort of entity or omnipotent force forcing these views on anyone, right? This is sort of a cultural evolution that is taking place among people who consume the goods, services, the media, the content that's out there, and they're expressing some kind of preference for one thing or the other. So the question is, from a business perspective or from a candidate perspective, where do you want to meet people where they're at, and where do you want to lead them, and where does it make sense to do either of those things? Um, so the people that get canceled, I think, are it. Granted, there are circumstances where it's maybe taken too far, ultimately, but at the end of the day, it is what it is what it is, right? Like, you kind of have to understand your market, right? So like, you don't want to, it's like, it really is just understanding market, right? And again, you don't have to pander to people, right? That's not what you should be. You should obviously always be authentic to yourself. And are there circumstances where the public maybe should be a little more lenient, or understanding of like a joke or something that maybe wasn't serious, or even be able to sort of kind of have some perspective on the seriousness of various things? Sure, is that the case? But I think overall, um, you have to know what your brand is and what sort of thing you're going to be leaning into. And it's like comedy, for example, is like a big thing that you in some ways you hear the lament of like, oh well, you can't tell jokes anymore, but like also I hear plenty of very funny comedians telling jokes still. You know what I mean? And like, some of those jokes are kind of edgy, for some audiences, and hilarious for others, right? And they still very much have a market, for those sorts of things. So in those senses, it's just sort of like figuring out, like, who's your audience, who do you want to talk to. Um but it is an interesting cultural moment, again, because I don't think that there's any, again, like, unseen force that's like foisting this upon society. It's more, just like a cultural moment that we're in. And the thing is, like, everyone has a bigger voice now than they used to, because they have access to all of, these social media platforms in a way that they never have. And especially in the last couple of years, you're looking at like a TikTok or a Facebook, not Facebook, I'm sorry, Instagram, like Reels, or like things like that. The reach that you could get off a random TikTok for something, I mean, you could get millions of views on that. I mean, now go back in time and tell someone in 1995, like, there's going to be this app, this thing, and what's an app? But no, but they'd be like, what, there's going to be this thing where you can record a video of yourself, like, doing whatever, dancing, talking about something, like, doing a bit, comedy bit. And that thing, the random person, could potentially have millions of people watching you do that. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you, TV? Like, someone would invite me on TV? No,
It
no,
takes
no,
me
no.
15 seconds to get online.
That's it. 15 seconds. And it's going to be in your pocket, by the way. You're going to be able to carry it around your pocket. So imagine telling someone in in the 90s or early 2000s that would even be the case, or even at the, sort of mid 2000s, when social media started to sort of, catch fire a little bit. So, I think consumers have a bigger voice too. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I think you just have to look at stuff on a case by case basis. The one thing I will say is, like, advising clients on this stuff. The one thing that I will say is, like, if you decide as a brand that you're going to weigh in on an issue, do not backpedal. Like, if you better commit. So if you're going to make a stand on something like ESG or like DEI or something like that, don't do it and then backpedal because there's like backlash from some like troll on the internet or some like collection of trolls on the internet, right? You have to stick to it, because if you don't commit to it, then what you end up having is a situation where you've pissed off the trolls, but then you're also pissing off your own audience that you're trying to reach in the first place. So then you're like, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So you have to really commit to it and be who you are, right? Like don't back down from that. So that would be, the one thing that we talk a little bit about is like, if you're going to do something like in the social good space, stick to it. And if you don't feel like you can, then, try to do something else. Like don't, go down that path.
So when you start with a client, do you kind of try to clearly define kind of, I wouldn't say their morals, but kind of where they stand on certain issues? Is that kind of like a starting point?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So, like for corporate clients, oftentimes that's not necessarily the case that you're having. But I mean, you get a sense of what their values are, and some brands have very specific, very clear values. Where they're in those spaces. Others aren't so clear necessarily. So, you kind of have to talk about those things if you're going to operate in that space. Otherwise, and also from a marketing perspective, and then take a look at the audience and be like, well, who are you reaching? Who do you want to reach? Who do you want to resonate with? How can you do it authentic? I mean, that's one thing that we've been thinking a lot about is authenticity. Like you can't shoehorn certain brands or even personalities into different boxes where they don't fit. Like it just doesn't make any sense, and people will catch on to it too. Like there's a lack of self-awareness. Like if you're trying to be funny or do some like super cringy thing, to borrow the Gen Z slang, right? Real cringe. I'll probably get crucified by Gen Z for maybe misusing some of that lingo there, but like there is this element of cringe, right? That if you're not self-aware about it or you're not being funny about it, that it's bad. So we do often think about those values up front and who the audience is and whether or not it makes sense to be talking about certain issues or not. But we definitely think about that. And for candidates, you kind of know where they stand on stuff already. So we get to make decisions. I mean, at least at our own firm, we get to make decisions about who we want to work with and who we don't. So we say no plenty of times to people, which is fine with me. So
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions on your selective for your clients and I guess candidates you take. And that's awesome that obviously you're at a level where you can do that too. Like you're comfortable as a company and not just financially, but morally probably too. They're like, oh, we don't want to touch them. And this is going to sound a little dated, but when I watched Mad Men, they couldn't have brands, obviously. Like they couldn't, if they had Pepsi, they couldn't have cola. Is that something that you constantly think? Obviously, you can't have like candidates obviously in the same race or in the same sector or anything like that. Is that something that you have to constantly check and not check and verify, but something you have to think about when you take clients too?
Yeah, always. So we avoid conflict of interest like the plague, which is that sounds like a pretty normal, straightforward thing to do. You would be shocked at some of the stories, though, that circulate about people trying to play both sides of races or issues, or like two candidates of the same party running against each other in a primary election, and
One PR firm.
One PR firm, two partners have no idea that one is doing the other. That's
crazy.
Messy breakups as a result of that, like corporate, firm sort of breakups because of that type of stuff. So yes, we do have a pretty rigorous conflict check. If we get a sense that we're going to take on a new client that might have some interest that runs counter to, and they may have nothing to directly do with each other, but runs counter to one of our other clients that we've been working with, and we already are have on the roster, we will absolutely go check with them to see if it's okay or not okay. And then are pretty open with the new client about, okay, well, we work with, such and such organization or candidate or company. Is this going to be a problem for you? Because at the end of the day, it's our job to do 100%, like make 100% effort for that client. Like we can, I really hate to see consultants and PR firms and other people. I'm not saying it happens a lot, but you do see it where, you try to play both sides of an issue, or try to, you back away from your client because it feels like you're taking a little heat for something from someone else that you have an interest in not upsetting. I think that's nonsense. You absolutely, like, if you accept a client, you're accepting the responsibility to do 100 the best job you possibly can do for them, and you have to advocate for them. So that's it. So that's how we kind of look at it. And if the answer to that very simple question of will we be able to go to the mat for this client should we need to, if the answer is no, then we can't take it. If the answer is yes, then yeah, okay, let's do it.
No, that's great. I like that. Uh, so moving on to my next question, uh, and I want to phrase this correctly. Obviously, you still have plenty of career left to go, but what is your we'll say it this way then, your Mona Lisa so far? What is like your golden Mona that you have that keeps you driving, that you've are happy every time you think about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we have a lot of cool things that we get to work on. So I'm very, very fortunate to have that. And there are little things that happen every day that make me happy and are that make me glad that I'm doing this. Reinforce the fact that this is a great thing to be doing. So for example, uh, it's just like small things sometimes. Like today, we had some of our team in the office, which doesn't happen too often in one spot because we're kind of all over the place. We have folks in DC, we have folks up here in Jersey, different parts of the state, team member in Louisiana. So it's like we're pretty spread out. But we had the opportunity to gather today, and we were doing some work for a client, putting together some creative stuff. And it was just cool to see, a couple of our team members just clicking and really, locking into a creative process and like bouncing stuff off of each other. And, for a growing team, small but growing team, small by design in many ways, that was such a cool thing to see. It's like we have that we've developed a culture here among our team that we're able to take risks creatively. We're able to take intellectual risks. That was a fun, like, stuff like that makes me really happy because it's important to me, because you see it all over, that you see the opposite happening in so many places. And when we started hiring people, my first thing was like, we have to have a culture that allows for everyone to be wrong at some point, or to screw up, or to fail, or what I mean, or to offer a because I have plenty of bad ideas. We all do, right? Like every now and then. So you have to have that space to be able to be honest about it, throw it out there, evaluate it, and then, get there. So we like to say, it's not about being right, it's about getting the right answer. And, so it's like stuff like that is super cool to see. And watching the team succeed in their own ways too, kind of pick up the ball and run with it. Cause I started this on my own. So like it was me and whatever was in my head on that and on any given day. And then, I have a great partner who came in 2014. We've been working together since then, brought on our first employee a few years later, and, been growing ever since. But just watching everyone on our team kind of like, again, be able to pick up the ball and just sort of run with it. And in some ways, like, do a much better job than just I could do on my own. It has been a very gratifying experience. So I love that. I some of the campaigns that we've done too are pretty important to us, just because they make a big difference in people's lives. So there are moments there as well that I could point to. But I would say, like, for me, the most present thing every day is the little victories, every day that we get through this problem, or we solve it as a team, or we're all kind of clicking and working really well together. So that's huge for me. Very, very gratifying.
No, that's great. I mean, I can totally get that from a kind of like, you're the owner and you're taking it personal. This is like what you built. You selected these people, and just to see them work together, that's great. And it was all in person.
Yeah, it was all in person today. So we had a couple of our team members in person today. I'm not like a huge like get back in the office, type
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
We do plenty of we were actually working virtually on Zoom prior to the pandemic. So we had a Zoom subscription before. So we were in on the ground floor of Zoom.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, which is cool. But yeah, so in person, but even like, when you hear it on calls or like different things or like see the growth of various members of the team. I mean, there was a point at which, when you're starting a business, you don't even know if you're going to have a team at some point. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work out or not, but we're going to give it a shot. And you're kind of just hammering away at whatever you can and learning what you can do on your own. And then you start bringing people in and it's like, wow, this is working out. Cool.
Yeah, I don't have to work 7 days a week. I don't have to constantly have it in the back of my head, even though I still will, but I'll have less work. Is that kind of the vibe you feel?
A little bit, yeah. So I think there are a couple so that's been a management challenge. It's interesting. I try to be like pretty transparent too with the team about like growing as a manager because like obviously again starting on my own, and then bringing my partner on, and again very fortunate to have my partner involved with this, and we sort of developed a way of communicating that was sort of like shorthand, kind of like back and forth. We'd always be able to just like get through stuff and do it very quickly and kind of developed an intuition about what the other person was saying about like different creative choices or different strategies or thoughts on things. So we were able to develop that. And then like when you start bringing other people into that mix, it's like, wait a second, I think we have to crack this open a little bit more, try to like figure out what it is we're doing between us two and then help communicate that to the rest of the team. So that's been an interesting challenge, going through. So I don't know if it means necessarily less work. Generally speaking, I could just like shift my focus a little bit to different areas, or more of my focus to different areas. We do try to foster a pretty good work-life balance, but at the end of the day, my philosophy is that you know everyone working with us on the team, um, they deserve work-life balance. For me, of course, like I try to get it myself, but like there are times when you have to put in the extra hours, and guess what? It's my responsibility, right? So if something happens like late at night or like on a weekend, that's on me, right? I got to figure it out, and on my partner too. We both kind of just figure it out, and try not to drag other people into it unless it's totally necessary. So I think so it doesn't necessarily mean taking more time off, though though I have been trying to organize things a little bit better to achieve a little bit more work-life balance.
Yeah, that's always good. And I totally get that with you trying to expand. It's like it's hard to, I hate sports metaphors, but hand off the ball to other people because you want to do just as good effort and you feel like if you could pass this on, I still want to do a really good job, but if I'm passing this work off to someone else, are they going to handle it just as well as I would? And your name behind the company is, since you hired other people, they're under you. So what they do falls under what your company does and your name. So it's very difficult to kind of, like give that power to employees as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the sports metaphor I think is helpful in that, or analogy is helpful in that sense. In that, handing people the ball, it's like, okay, so my style might be to run up the middle and just smash my way through or whatever. And then someone else's style might be able, they might try to go around, the pile and run to the sideline and then, just run faster than everyone else. Right. And that's fine. You can score touchdowns both ways. So I think that's fine. But getting used to that, right? Because again, I use the analogy, but like, I'm used to just running it up the middle and smashing away. And then, you hand the ball off to someone and you see them running the other way up the field and you're like, "Oh, what's going on here?" But then it's like, wait a second. No, that's just a different kind of thing. And you can absolutely move the ball forward. You can score touchdowns that way. Totally fine. Like it doesn't matter how you do it as long as it's done the right way. And there are a million different right ways to do it. So, but that's a hard realization. It's like the first time you fully let go, you're like, okay, here we go.
No, I've been there. So with all this advancement in AI and search engine optimization, what do you feel like makes the biggest impact on obviously changing narratives for clients, or we'll just say clients today? And what do you see it being 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, AI is a huge challenge potentially from a reputation perspective. A huge challenge because I mean these the ability to create a facsimile of a person, both from an audio perspective and the visual, is getting a lot better too. Um, is getting to a point where it's quite convincing. So yeah, AI is a crazy sort of a crazy development in that it's getting very good at people are getting good at imitating real life people, and so there was a situation recently where someone took uh, a segment of a speech that the president had made, and then ran that through machine learning model, and did a robocall, one of those automated calls up in New Hampshire, telling voters to vote 2 days like after election day, right? So so it sounds like him, right? Like if you're not really paying attention, sure there are like little things, little tells or whatever, but it was I think that's sort of the first salvo, or one of the first salvos that we're seeing in sort of the AI wars with that. So in terms of the issues we're likely to have from a reputational perspective, I think we're only scratching the surface at this point, and I'm not sure that there are a whole lot of safeguards in place, both from the AI companies and social media platforms too. Like I know they're trying to, put in place, little check boxes that you can hit. Is, oh, this is like altered content or AI generated content. Okay, great. Like, but that assumes that you're going to actually check the box, and that there isn't some filter that can't figure that, or that can figure that out. So it's definitely an issue, and something that we're thinking a lot about with clients. Like, what do you do if AI, like some AI clone of you, does something totally outrageous?
Like that first episode from Black Mirror, if anybody knows that.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're like right there, I think, in terms of what AI can do. I mean, there are also a lot of good things too. In terms of being able to analyze big data sets and kind of ask questions and speed up sort of productivity in some spaces, but it is kind of spooky in other ways.
Yeah. It I always hear, and I'm a computer engineer, and I always hear when people say that data to see trends and stuff like that, but I've never, you know, like whenever I hear big data, I hear big companies making even more money off of information. And it's like it never kicks back until, like 10 or 15. It's like Facebook, whenever they had the Cambridge analytics and stuff like that. What was that, like 10 or 15 years down the line? But that's a whole another podcast, whole different episode. Uh, so what do you see the long-term goals of Publix down the line? What do you envision the company to be?
Sure. That's a good question. So what I like to say is that our goal is to continue working on some of the most difficult and interesting problems out there. And as long as we're doing that, and we are seen as the firm that excels in those spaces, that I'll be perfectly happy doing that. So I think overall, the future of this industry is agile, is small, not necessarily gigantic, 1,000 employee operations. Of course, there's always going to be a place for that, but I think there is a specific um, space where you can build an extraordinarily efficient and effective small team that can handle a wide array of problems, especially the most difficult ones. So for me, as long as we're continuing to do that, and also like for our team, providing a great workplace, and helping them provide and for their own lives, that's extraordinarily important to me as well. So I think 10, 15 years, we'll be working on some really interesting problems. Who knows, like probably something related to AI, or other sorts of technological innovations at that point. So that's really, I think, what my goal is, beyond that, and just to continue doing this, and as long as I find it fun for myself, and when I don't, then someone else can take the reins.
Oh, that's a great answer. Last question. And like I said, you can take your time to think about it. What is something that your parents did that you'd like to pass on to a next generation? And what is something that you might do differently or new that they didn't do?
Sure. I think that, um, something that we did, a good amount of growing up was, volunteering a bit for different, different causes and different things. So as imperfect as your life can be, you can kind of look back and say, okay, well, my parents, um, emphasized, this one thing or another thing. So always kind of emphasized, giving back to people in different ways. So I would say like instilling that in the next generation is important, just trying to take care of neighbors and, um, doing whatever you can for people who aren't, doing so well themselves for whatever reason, for a lot of times, as a result of things that are completely out of their own control. So, I would say that is, that's definitely something that's a pretty, timeless kind of thing is, try to give back as much as you can. Um, something different that I would do. Um, that's a really interesting question. Like it's funny because you think about growing up and things are so different now and are going to be so much different for future generations. And I think, I don't know, I think every generation may have felt that way, probably. But just even thinking about, again, like having the team in the office today. So we've got some millennials, right? So I'm sort of the middle millennial, as is my partner. And then we've got a younger, younger millennials and then Gen Z, right? And the differences between even those age cohorts where we all are working in the same space and we're all pretty technically close in age. So really, I kind of grew up on the cusp of like where social media was, kind of just starting to come out. So like senior year of high school, only then could you start getting access to Facebook, for with a university, with a college email address. We had MySpace. So, that was crazy. So MySpace was like the thing. Um, but it was nothing like before. And like growing up, like as a younger kid, we had one computer in our household. It never worked. Right. I mean, it was like you remember Gateway, it looked like a cow, the box or whatever, like those Gateway
Yes.
Packard.
Yes.
So we always had the worst computer, right? And it never worked. It was always like laden with viruses, like computer viruses from one thing or another. So, the internet was a much different thing growing up. It's not like we were, going to bed with iPads and reading on them. So it's like it's kind of hard to think like what would you pass on to something differently for the next generation, because it's hard to conceive of even what someone who grew up just a few years after I did went through, having access to that sort of technology and information and all that stuff. I don't know. That's a really good question. Like, what would you do differently? I don't know. One thing that always kind of I think about, and I'm not sure if this is, something that, previous shit, but like really, focusing on mental health, I think is an important thing. Just talking about that as much as possible, because like the way that looks is different now too. And there's so many other stress. Again, like social media is kind of stressful, right? You're seeing it in Congress where they're the big platforms are in these hearings talking about how social media is impacting kids and their development and all of these different things. And it's real, right? It's a really real thing. So I don't know, like having some sort of mental health kind of, being more open about that and kind of passing that value on to kids down the line. I'm just saying like, look, like it's okay to focus on some of these things and on your mental health, and it's okay to have feelings, and like you should be able to express them in a certain way. And I don't know. So, and that wasn't always something that we had growing up. It was sort of just like there's still a little bit of that. Like, I feel like I'm one of those, like back in my day, right? We used to have to walk to school both ways uphill and in the snow barefoot. It's like, well, that's not exactly what, but it's like there was a little bit of a suck it up mentality, right? Like if something bad happens, suck it up.
Yeah, case of the grumpies. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like you're fine. Don't worry about it. Like we're you're feeling something and it's a valid thing is just suck it up. You'll be all right. Don't talk. Stiff upper lip. Don't talk to talk about it. So I think having some sort of conversation about that. I don't know. It's probably the best I can do there. Because again, it's so hard to conceive of like what even the next generation is going to look like, or what this generation growing up is going to. When you look at some of these kids today, and you're like, man, what is the world going to be like when you're my age? It's like bizarre. It's like Jets. Are we finally getting to the Jetsons? Like
Yeah.
robotic maid, running around and flying cars and stuff? Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it seems like it's going to with everything in the early stages, holograms and AI. And I don't know. I saw something that's not even technologically advanced, but it was people who came to your house who filled up your tank of gas. I just thought, and people who come to your house to pick up poop, even though robots will do that. When I say pick up poop, I mean dog's poop. But it's just like those things. If, like you said earlier, like 15 or 20 years ago, you told me things like that, that there would be stuff like that, and it just changes your perspective on what will be and what is currently. But no, that was a good answer. And yeah, a lot of people around our age, millennials, pick mental health because um this is going to sound funny, but like let's say 1940s or 1960s, and or maybe I'm making a generalization, but I think dental hygiene is what mental health is, or what it has be today, what it was 15 years, because back then I dental hygiene was something, oh okay, maybe I'll go to the dentist and get my teeth, and some people didn't even go to
Mhm.
the dentist back then. It wasn't even a thing. But nowadays, like like taking days off for mental health or seeing a therapist or just being mindful. I feel like that's more stronger today than it was 15 or 20 years ago. But yeah, that is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Especially for young men, I think too that that's one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like where are these young men kind of like getting into bad spaces, or bad headspace, or acting out in a certain way, and it's just like there has to be a good model for how to manage your feelings and manage your emotions and confront the world in front of you, which is a lot different than what was modeled for us growing up. And I think that's okay that the world is different. It's just a matter of like, okay, like we need to make sure everyone's got the emotional tools to kind of handle these things, because it's not like anyone was like telling us how to deal with it, right? So like you kind of just see the stuff that you grow up with. So I would say like young men too, especially, invest in mental health and kind of try to understand what it is that's driving whatever feeling, or driving people into like these sort of darker corners of or more sinister corners of the internet, which is a little terrifying, because like again there are these like little gateways right out there, and like you put one foot forward through it and you kind of start listening. Oh well, that doesn't sound so bad, and then you listen to the next thing and the next thing, and then all of a sudden you're like down the algorithmic rabbit hole from hell. And you're listening to some pretty extreme, nasty stuff. And I think it all stems from a place of just feeling like there's no model for how to manage, feelings and manage the world that we're in. So I don't know. I think that's something I do think about a little bit too.
No, those are some good notes. To be fair, the level extent of PR that I had was TV shows. So the thick of it, House of Cards, Veep.
Great show, by the way. Think
Which
of it.
one? Oh
And
man,
deep and
that's one of his best. I don't care if you watch any of those other shows. You really need to know British television and like have the subtitles on. But if anyone's seen Veep, it's based off of Veep. But, sorry, other way around. The thick
yeah.
of it is based off of Veep and In the Loop. But it's just really good bollocking, like insults.
Oh God.
I
Yeah.
I like to just watch it in the background. But
Well, you know what? It's funny. There is a Malcolm Tucker deep in here. Some days you're dealing with something, and you've seen the Malcolm Tucker like outburst, and you're like,
Oh man.
I really want to do the bean to cup,
Yeah. Oh.
It's great, but it's funny when people ask me, people ask me a lot, like politics, like what is it really like? Is it like House of Cards or is it like Veep? And I was like, honestly, it's Veep. That's like the most accurate representation of my day to day. And it's funny, the further I get into my career, I just rewatched Veep, and like some of the episodes just hit a little too close to home. Something, because you're like, oh God, I know someone like this, or like, I had a client who did this exact thing and it was so stupid. And it's like, so it's not House of Cards, right? There's no like calculated, like Machiavellian sort of plotting through things. It's Veep. It's one sort of caper after another sometimes, and Parks and Rec too. That's another, if you're looking for like a show that accurately represents local government and politics,
I thought you were going to throw a little bit of Curb Your Enthusiasm in there too.
Oh yeah, that's that might be a little dry, I think, for real. It's I don't know. There's just something about Veep though, or the thick of it, that's very, it's just so, it hits very close to home. Like, I think, I don't know. It's as if Armando Iannucci kind of like spent time actually like as a fly on the wall some of these places, because you're like, what is going on? So it's funny. That's a disappointing answer for a lot of people though. They want to believe it's like the Frank Underwood pushing like a journalist onto the train tracks and in the underground, or the metro or whatever. And
yes, the metro, the lovely metro. Thanks again, and I appreciate it. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
If you like this week's episode of People More Interesting Than Me, please follow me on Apple Podcasts so you won't miss out on more episodes like these.